Welcome back to Feminism Now, a podcast featuring leaders and activists who are on the front lines of the fight for constitutional equality, economic justice, and reproductive rights. I'm Christian F. Nunez, the president of the National Organization for Women. In Season 2 of Feminism Now, our theme is Women Leading Democracy. But women and their allies come in all ages, and all ages should be able to play a role in democracy and have their voices heard. That's why we're thrilled today to speak with V. Spear, who is wildly popular on their social media channel Under the Desk News and podcast American Fever Dream, which reaches and resonates with Generation Z. Do you have thoughts on anything you've heard this season? We want to hear from you. You can do that by sending us an email at feminismnow@now.org. We are excited to have you with us on this journey. Everyone, we are super excited today to have V. Spear on with us to talk about the young generation leading the movement, leading democracy. And I'm so excited to have V with us today. So let's just get started, V. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Okay, let's go. So as we're talking and having this conversation, which I'm super excited to have, when we talk about representation and we talk about the importance of seeing people like yourself in positions of power, if you see it, we think we can be it, right? So it's really important that that exists. It means so much to see women of color, LGBTQIA+ people, immigrants, people with disabilities leading democracy. So doesn't it seem really interesting when we look at the current representation of people in political power and spaces that is not what we see. It's not reflected every single day. And in 2022, statistics said that 44% of the U.S. population was only under the age of 35, but only 7% of the U.S. Congress is under 40. So we're seeing that there's difference from what we're saying we want and actually what we're seeing actually coexist. This doesn't mean that these young voters are apathetic. Far from it. We're excited to hear from you today and the work that you've been doing on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram channels. Under the Desk News, V also publishes daily updates about world news and the political process, reaching an audience of millions. So V. Spear has been really dominating in the space of making sure that young millennials and Gen Z voters have a space to have a conversation and bringing their leadership to the forefront. And V, it is so lovely to have you here in the show. And I'm super excited to really welcome you so we can have this wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're huge on TikTok. I want to know what made you get started on TikTok? What made you decide to actually use TikTok as your platform to connect with the Gen Z and the millennial audience?
So like all things that I've been successful in my life, I kind of stumbled into it. I did not intend for any of this to happen. I started TikToking. It was early pandemic. And there was actually this history teacher where she would pretend that she was a history teacher and do like lessons. And people were just sort of doing entertainment, goofy stuff. And I thought I could probably be like America's civics teacher in some ways and just kind of like talk about the stuff that I was excited about. And I was teaching people really just about the things that they forgot were important, like being dialed into current events, like building community with each other. You have to remember in like 2020, if you turned on the news, it was just to terrify yourself. Every single update was difficult. We were very scared. We were feeling disconnected and people were giving up hope. And if there's one thing that can make you feel better when you're scared, it's like having knowledge. And so I got under my desk to make it like a safe space, because where do you go when you're scared? You go under your desk, and just started telling people what happened that day. Not what it means, not what it doesn't mean, not what's coming. Just like, hey, it's Monday night, and here's what happened. And folks really liked it. And I think it's been an important way of rebuilding trust in media and in getting people to feel smart and included in conversations and letting them know that they really do have power and that they can understand these really complicated things that are going on in the world and do something about them.
Well, I like what you talk about when you say building trust back with media, because I think that's a lot of what's happened as people have lost trust. And especially with the younger generation, I feel like they don't trust the media anymore and they don't trust the political system. They feel like the system has failed them. And as we see right now what's happening in the political climate, I think that's really affecting our ability to engage them in the political process. What do you think is happening, and why do you feel that with this current political awakening, we're seeing more young voters, I don't want to say that they're turning their back on the system because I think they have their own way of engaging, but they're rejecting the typical process of political engagement.
Yeah, they're certainly not, Gen Z is certainly not as polite and in their place as the millennial generation was trained to be, honestly, by our parents, which was like, okay, I'll just wait my turn and I just want to be good at things. Gen Z certainly does not subscribe to that. And that's one of the things I admire and learn so much from them about is the idea that like you can question authority and that it's not about waiting your time or paying your dues. There are other ways to gain information that aren't this traditional path. And I think with them, they're so aware of language, much more aware of language than I think any other generation has been, to the point that this is the generation that really created and embraced neo-pronouns even, right? Like letting yourself label yourself to what exactly perfectly feels right to you. So when they hear things like the word ally, that word to them has been really weaponized and destroyed in many ways, because what they've seen is, well, we're not going to give you power, but we're your allies, so you should vote for us because we will represent your interests. And they're like, I could represent my own damn interest. Like, I would like to have the voice. I mean, we think of someone like Maxwell Frost, the first Gen Z member of Congress. Maxwell Frost doesn't need anybody to speak for him. He's an incredibly intelligent and thoughtful and productive individual, and he's crushing it up there in Congress. So I think when Gen Z hears something like President Biden or Nancy Pelosi, and I'm going to talk about the Democrats because that's my lane, but certainly this happens on the right as well, say things like, you know what, I told you that it was going to be my last term, but I'm going to run one more time and I need your support, Gen Z, because I'm your ally. They're like, girl, just pass the baton of power. Like, we're ready. We're ready. You have to trust us or we won't trust you.
You know, I think that's a really interesting point you bring up because we always get into this conversation, right, about succession planning, but it really has to shift, right, and change because why are we always passing it? Why aren't we sharing? I'm Gen X, right? So I was brought in this space that, you know, you were taught you have to pay your dues. You have to struggle through. You have to wait it out. You have to do all this grunt work. You have to, you know, wait these long, work 20, 30, 40, 50, so many years. And then when you've done that, then it's time for you to step up. But that is really unfortunate. Like, why people feel like they have to continue doing that. And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing you say, V, is that the new generation is saying, I'm not subscribing to that. Would you agree?
I definitely agree. And I think they see the wealth gap and the power gap so extreme right now. Also, the United States was never meant to be a hereditary monarchy. So the idea that we have these sorority-like bigs and littles where power of the presidency is passed down through families to the point that literally sometimes, the father is the president and then the son is, or the nephew is after that, like these political families and dynasties, that's not what America's supposed to be about. And outside of the actual hereditary monarchy little systems that we have popping up, you have things like, oh, well, they're on Nancy Pelosi's like list. So she has the opportunity to put her finger on the scale for someone like Adam Schiff, right? Because that's who she's sort of deemed who she's going to mentor. So now that's going to give him advantage. I think those systems are something that certainly Gen Z rejects and says like, no, we don't like this. We don't want Reaganomics to trickle through all the way down to the Ted Cruzes. We don't want democratic ideals from the 1970s to be what's been handed down and what we're still being served now from Joe Biden. They want to see something that faces the very real emergency issues that their generation is going to be stuck dealing with, and they don't want to wait anymore.
These are great points. But one of the things that scares me, and I have to be really honest with this, is that when I'm looking at the state of where we are in this country right now and who is the alternatives, I'm concerned that people are choosing to just totally disengage sometimes, right? Because when we are at a place when our rights are completely being taken away from us and stripped away. So when I look at it and I see the alternative, I wonder, what will, by not engaging, I don't want to get too political on here, but I do want to say the alternative, but we have to go with who has demonstrated, they may not be perfect, but they have demonstrated a commitment to equity. They have demonstrated a commitment to making some changes because no one is going to be perfect. And so while we do that, then how do we then utilize that person who has made that commitment to making some changes more than any person has in their position to then, who I believe has been Biden so far, right? To then engage the Gen Z and engage the youth to then include them. So I understand the feeling that youth and Gen Z feel often. But when it comes down to what we're facing right now, how do we get them to still make, figure out a way to like what we need to do right now so that we have the opportunity to fix it?
So I think that's an excellent question, and I struggled with it, but I actually think I figured it out fairly recently. I was at an event called Trending Up. It brought in 150 creators, many of them Gen Z and younger, and I had 3 days to really spend time with them to understand, like, what is it that's not clicking that clicked for my generation, which is, some folks might call it the lesser of two evils. I don't think Joe Biden's an evil man. I think he's done incredible things for this country. There's no denying that. Same with Vice President Harris. Incredible things for this country. But if we want to call it the lesser of two evils or the seeing what would happen otherwise, what I realized is there is an experience gap even between millennials and Gen Z. And I relate this to I'm 8 years older than my brother, and my parents had me at 19. So I remember my parents being poor. I remember them laying out the bills and deciding okay, we have to pay the light bill first. And I remember going through that with them. He doesn't remember shit. So when he makes half a sandwich, you know what I mean? When he makes half a sandwich and throws the other half out, I'm like, oh my God, you should put that in the fridge for later in case we don't have anything for tonight. And he's like, what are you talking about? And this is what I think it is between millennials and Gen Z. They have not lived in a world like we did, where gay marriage was not, it didn't exist, and I never thought I was going to get it. We're being
I need you
out.
to keep preaching, please. Keep
That's
preaching.
what I'm saying. When being an out person, I mean, there's that old joke that all the waiters used to be all gay and wonderful, right? It's because we couldn't get jobs everywhere else. You could get fired from your job for being gay. When we talk about women only getting the right to have their own credit card in the 70s, these kids, as we call them, which is anyone under the 18 to 24, they don't know what that's like. They don't know what it's, they grew up in a time when social emotional learning was something they were getting in school, which is incredible. We should keep doing that. But they grew up being anti-bullying. They grew up with their maximalist demands being met almost always, where I think, whether that's maximalist entertainment satisfaction from the iPads and the telephones they had access to, or the access to knowledge and information they had access to, or their student government because their parents were on PTA and they were fighting for them and constantly making it the teacher's problem and never the child's problem. I think the experience gap between even millennials and Gen Z is so big, the way that gap between me and my brother in 8 years was so big that they don't see it as what they could lose because they have never felt that loss and they have never felt that win. So I think it's an experience gap, and the way that I've overcome this is by telling stories of what it was like when I was their age. Do you know how difficult it was when I was your age? We lived through so much. And while this generation has certainly lived through a ton, they have in many ways been isolated from understanding how politics works to help you or not. So I've been telling stories of why I can't go back to what we had before.
It's so important that you point out that experience gap because I think that's a lot of what's happened. But at the same time, I think that the overturning of Roe is going to have them understand what it's like to lose an important right. Because for so long, they never had to worry about their rights being taken away. And now a lot of them are going to be facing that experience of having to either have to travel for that reproductive freedom and the access to, contraceptive or abortion care, or they're going to see their friends, or they're going to have this facing these things. So they're going to have to now understand what that struggle or that experience or that is happening and why. And I'm hoping that we can, all of us organizers, everyone can relate to them, that this is why we have to really get out and vote. And this is when you have a person who's basically telling us that they're going to do everything in their power to continue to restrict rights and take all these rights away from everyone, gender-affirming care, to book bans, to DEI, to abortion. We have to make sure they understand what's at stake, I think. That's part of our role.
Well, let me tell you a little something about Roe v. Wade, because I have a very unique experience with this. There's this conference every year called VidCon. It's the biggest creator conference. There's 70,000 kids that show up to see their favorite TikTokers and YouTubers and stuff. And my first year, so 2 years ago, that I did VidCon, this will be my third year, was the day that they overturned Roe v. Wade was that morning of the first day of VidCon. And I knew I was going to be walking around in my little peacock suit and everyone's going to be like, oh my God, V, tell me what happened. And I walked out of my hotel room and I went over to do my session and I just got swarmed by young people, boys and girls, men and women, who were like, V, what happened this morning? I saw your video. What do you mean that Roe v. Wade got overturned? And I'm like, listen, it got overturned. It's not over. There are adults that are going to help you through this. There are generations. There are the women who fought for Roe in the first place have to get back on those picket lines and do it again. And we're going to do it. And I was trying to get them jazzed up. And I had this group of boys that I was talking to, and they were like, what does this mean like for us? Like, I think that girls are going to be afraid of us now. And I was like, they are going to be afraid of you. So the things that you can do are not pull this bullshit that you're not using condoms. I don't know if I could swear on your show. Sorry.
Yes, you can.
Okay. That we're not going to use condoms. We're not going to pressure women into doing things they're not ready for. We're going to be respectful of our partner's ability to be on birth control or not. We're going to take dual responsibility for not bringing children into the world that we're not ready for or don't want. It is going to be both of you having to do that because, yes, you did lose something today. Congress took away from you the opportunity for a second chance to fix something and make your life the way that you want it to be. They took away the option of abortion, not just from you, people who don't want children, but if you are somebody who, you know, in the next couple of years, you're going to be getting married and trying to start a family, Congress also took away from you the right to be the man of your family, the head of your family, and to make decisions for you and your wife's health if something, God forbid, goes wrong with this pregnancy. You may not have access to miscarriage care. You may not have access to abortion care. You may not have access to a lot of different things. And how does that make you feel as a man, as the future head of your family? Because we got to talk to both sides, you know, that this has been taken out of your hand. Do you want some congressman up in D.C. making decisions about you and your wife's body? And they were like, oh my God. And they were so fired up about it, but they forget. Time goes on. And now we're in a place where they're like, yeah, they overturned it 2 years ago and that sucks and we want to get it back. But like, you can still get Plan C. And I'm like, for a couple days, Louisiana just said, no, you can't. It is so hard to get something back once you've lost it. And so what I try to dig in with them is finding the language that makes sense to them and finding the fear of loss that's going to provide longevity for the fight, because this is a long fight. It took the Republicans 50 years to get us here. You know, it's going to take us more than one election to get us out of it.
We'll get back to more issues that affect young voters most. But first, let's take a break with our segment, Action Now. This week, we're excited to invite you to our virtual Racial Justice Summit on June 18th. It's our 5th annual summit, and our theme this year is We Demand Equity Now. The 2-hour summit from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time will have some powerful speakers, including Gloria Blackwell, the president of the American Association of University Women, and Congresswoman Robin Kelly of Illinois, too. And of course, I'll be there. The Racial Justice Summit is free to attend, and you can find out more information at now.org. And now, back to our interview. I want to talk about this now. We talk about, you know, how this is a long fight. And one of the things I think we have to do better at is having a consistent, unified message and strategy. And that is inclusive of everyone. And when we think about this and we're talking about how do we include the young generations into this messaging, because I think that's really important, is making sure they're included in this messaging, making sure we're reaching them as well, and not only targeting the people that we assume want to hear it. Can you share with us, what do you think about the importance of having a consistent message and strategy for getting out our positions so that we can, you know, win and we can get our rights back, we can secure our rights and get back the ones that we've lost?
I think something that's interesting about the younger generation and the way they protest is that they think that they are inventing it. They don't know the history. You're laughing because you know it's true. You're laughing because you know it's true.
Well, it's so true, but
but part of that, again, is experience gap, right? Like I grew up, if you ask them who's Gloria Steinem, they might know, they might not know. You know what I mean? We're only taught certain civil rights leaders, and we're not taught about anybody since Martin Luther King in many ways who are doing incredible work. And
that's just one paragraph in the book, right?
That's what I'm saying. Do you know who Angela Davis is? Like, can you tell me about her work? So in many ways, they're at a loss because they don't know that a lot of this has been done and there is a path already in the woods for them. They're sometimes in the woods and they're like, oh, cool, a path. And I'm like, no, that path was very specific perfectly forged for you to follow that path and then take it further. And so I think in some ways we're back to that experience gap where they just don't know the history of the protesters other than the ones that have been more commercialized. Like in the last couple of years, even in the gay movement, we've seen people really understand who Marsha P. Johnson is. Well, it's because she was on a T-shirt at Target. This is important, though. Sometimes we think Target pride is silly until we realize, well, now a lot of people know who Marsha P. Johnson is. So I think there's a little bit of that. In addition, these are still young folks, and a lot of them are trying to make a name for themselves. The number one job that children want is YouTuber. That has exceeded doctor, nurse, lawyer, anything else. So the idea that you can be a content creator, it sort of intersects with political activism in a way that can cause a lot of issues. For example, who is the face of the movement? Nobody wants to be the face of the movement, but then when they're not the face of the movement, they're mad because it was their idea that got stolen or their content is being copied. It is protest for the purpose of creating content, which is a little bit different. I mean, we used to protest to get the newspapers to pay attention to us, so that's all the same. But in this way, it's like trying to get a viral moment on TikTok to be able to be a full-time content creator or achieve some other end. I think another thing that we get caught up on because there is this sort of like internet aspect to everything is the purity tests for the protesters. Well, did you include every single person? Did you say it exactly perfect every time? Are you the right person to say that? Will you use the right words? Are you using those words on social media? If you post about anything else, are you ignoring the big issues? And so I think that becomes a big issue. And then they get very singularly focused on not trying to get canceled. This is what I notice on TikTok. And it really complicates the message because if you didn't use the watermelon filter, you don't support Palestine. Well, if you didn't publicize your donations, then you don't support Palestine. And it's like not everybody wants to be so showy with the things they're doing, and not everybody needs to do the exact same thing. There's collective community, and then there's the diversity of the ways that we attack an issue. And I think they need a little bit more nuance in that world. They are extremely knowledgeable about the laws and the voting history of candidates, because clapbacks and owning a candidate, like recently there's something that went viral about a certain pro-Palestine protesters at an event who really owned Cory Booker on his associations with AIPAC. They knew exactly how much money he got from them. They know how to do those things because that's going to go viral and look very powerful. A clapback is very powerful, but is it effective? And so those are some of the things that I think are plaguing this generation's protest effectiveness. That and there are so many things to protest, and there are so many places, like maybe you bought a Starbucks coffee because you didn't realize that the Starbucks union was protesting because you didn't see that content yet. Well, now you're canceled for that because you didn't understand that. Maybe you were caught eating at a Pizza Hut. Well, Pizza Hut's on the BDS list. What's the BDS list? You don't even have time to catch up on it before you're like in trouble for not knowing it. I think it causes a lot of anxiety for people, and then it makes them opt out, or it makes them be more performative than they would have normally been.
When we're talking about the effectiveness of protests, I think this comes up so much is that there's the call in, call out. There is the dilution of the effectiveness of protests. And then there's this whole social media part about trying to go viral, that where we're seeing the integrity of the purpose behind the movement and the protests get lost. And I think what makes it hard for this generation is that their whole generation has been existent on social media, has been. And so I think it becomes very hard for them because they were raised, they were like social media babies. Everything was built around social media. They don't know how to almost separate their identities from social media because that's part of it. But it's also like, here's my mental health expert side coming in, but it's also increasing their anxiety, mental health, suicidality. It's like a double-edged sword for them. Why it helps them get that, but it's also creating so many other things for them that are creating and exacerbating mental health issues. So it's a very hard position to play.
The protest style of Gen Z really reminds me more of the protest style of boomers who sat down in the fields of Vietnam. Not necessarily the student protesters, anti-war protesters, but the conscripted soldiers who got sent over there who were anti-war, and so they would sit down in the field. Or we also have tons of reporting about them killing their leaders over there so that they, there's a lot with the Vietnam War that we don't learn about that's interesting about American response. And what I see Gen Z lean into is what they will not do. They will not go to Starbucks. They will not eat at Pizza Hut. They will not vote for Joe Biden. They will not, they will not, they will not, which is good. That's part of it. But what will you do? Where is the action? Where is the progressive action? And that's a little bit harder to get out of them. And so I think, while sitting down in the fields of Vietnam was an important protest tactic, you also had the other side of people creating laws against the way that we would, that's how we got rid of conscription and the draft and whatnot. Like there had to be action forward, not just digging in. And I think when you see things like the encampments on college campuses and whatnot, that was a form of digging in and sort of stopping, which is one side of it. But I do think where we tend to miss is in, okay, well, how many of you are running for office then to reduce the amount of APAC influence because you refuse to take that particular money the way we've seen people refuse to take oil money in some cases? Where's the action? It can't just be inaction.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of it for everyone to understand that when we're talking about how do we move and we mobilize, it's more than just rallies. It's more than just protests. It's negotiation. It's having meetings. There's multiple parts to it. And we have to do it all to effectively move change and make something happen. And I really love how you talk about how are we doing the progressive action?
Well, let me give a shout out to the boomers again in Vietnam again, because I kind of dragged them so far, but I want you to know that I know everything you did and I appreciate it. But to shout out the boomers for stuff they did. These protests, for all of the police response and nonsense that there has been, and I don't believe in that. I think college is a place you're supposed to test the boundaries of society, and there's supposed to be a little safety net around you that the NYPD doesn't come in and bash your head in because you're encamped on your college campus. But that's just me. But with the boomers, when they were protesting the Vietnam War and when they wanted things changed, they were burning down ROTC buildings. Now, I'm not advocating for violence or burning things down, but this is just to show how far they went. They were burning down the ROTC buildings because that's where the draft files were. They thought, if you can't pick my number, you can't send me. They were fighting the police head on. And, I just think that there was a little bit more fire if you think about Marsha P. Johnson throwing the brick during the Stonewall riots. And here, it's a little bit like the things that we see them ask for are comfort. We see them ask for amnesty. We see them ask for divestment, which is a holdover from the 1980s protests. And I want to see them do a little bit more collective action forward. The Black Panthers started a breakfast program for children in the neighborhood. Show me something. Do something.
Listen, the whole entire free lunch, the free breakfast program is based off the Black Panther movement.
Correct.
And people, once again, co-opted that, but I wouldn't go in there either. But,
But I'm saying all movements have to provide. What are you providing?
And one of the things I love to speaking of movements is the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee was a very effective movement as well. The sit-ins, all the different things they did there was some action attached to it, spoke to the purpose of why they were actually acting, was connecting to the thing. So I really believe in the power of the young generation. I do feel that they are taking the initiative to learn the education that they were not given in their school systems, and they're trying to expand. But I also believe that there is important, like you're saying, that there also be action to problem solutions. 'Cause I'm a very solution-based person. How do we solve this? This is what we don't want to do, but also this is what we're willing to do to effectuate the change that we want to see.
I think their divestment thing is very smart. And I said this is a holdover from the 80s. In the 1980s, the anti-apartheid protests, this is the beginning of the stock market really having power and the average person trading stocks. This is the beginning of the yuppie era. They were the ones who were originally calling for the universities to divest from things that they didn't agree with. And I think that is actually one of the best things that they're doing right now. They understand the power of the money in their tuition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Bea, thank you so much for joining us today on Feminism Now. This has been such an enlightening, wonderful conversation. I hope that we stay in touch. Please share with us how people can reach out to you and stay in contact with what you're doing and the work that you're doing so that our listeners can stay in contact and just, keep up with Under the Desk News and all the wonderful things you're doing on TikTok and YouTube.
Yeah, so you can find me on all socials at Under the Desk News, and you can listen to my new podcast, American Fever Dream, wherever you get your podcasts. We do a breakdown of all the kooky things that happen in America that week, including, politics, pop culture, legislation, and then we end with an I Can't rant which is my favorite section of the whole show. We also highlight down ballot candidates for you to get to know about to keep you engaged and excited about voting.
Thank you, listeners, for being with us as we use season 2 of our podcast to showcase people making a real difference to women and their allies in our democracy. For our last episode this season, we are flipping the script. I'll be talking with our team about the past season, and we'd love to answer your questions. Send your thoughts to feminismnow@now.org, and you might end up on the show. This podcast, Feminism Now, is a production of the National Organization for Women. I'm Christian F. Nunez, NOW's National President. If you like what you hear, please go to now.org, read up on our core issues and our approach to advancing women's equality, and get involved. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.